everybody, and a pleasure to be here. Let me start and really talk about this context of providing or understanding your true north. And we're going to spend a bit of time today challenging some of the traditional dogmas that we have. And I often say that when we talk about learning and innovation from a learning perspective, we must look at how we challenge our individual dogmas, our individual ways of thinking and doing things. And for me, a big element of this here is looking at how do we challenge the way we've been doing things for a long period of time. We often say that we live in a period of unprecedented change. We often say that if your rate of learning is not faster than the rate of change, then you become irrelevant very quickly. But a big part of what I'm going to cover today is what is it that's accelerating this unprecedented rate of change that we find in the world around us. And this gives you a good context in terms of that there. It speaks to what is it that organizations, that executives, that leaders, that everybody in organizations need to focus on to become more agile and relevant in the type of world that we're going into. And so for a long period of time, we were told by management theory that you must be good at your bench strength, your execution leadership, as they said. So if you're in strategy, or if you're in operations, or if you're in finance, or if you're in the HR function, then that should be your focus continually. And yes, that has to continue to be your focus. But in the type of world and the type of change environment that we're going into, you've got to continually zoom out. You've got to understand what's happening in terms of the strategic leadership environment. And part of this context of strategic leadership is what's happening in the political economy that we're operating in. And really understanding and appreciating that political economy and linking it back to our organizations, to our individual selves, and the type of learning that we position within the organization. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today comes from three lenses or three perspectives. Competitiveness of self, my role as an individual, my journey in the next 5-10 years, and the learning environment that I need to operate in. Competitiveness of the organization that I work for, and the sector that I operate in. And lastly, competitiveness of the country that I live in, or countries that my company or organization operates in. And we've got to continually think about these three lenses of competitiveness: self, company, and country. The second one is around the economic industry, or the sector that I operate in. What's happening within that sector? And I'm going to argue today that our traditional understanding of sector competitiveness is irrelevant. I'm going to argue that sector disintermediation will become the new normal, and that we'll see this dissection between financial services players, insurance companies, retail companies, auto companies, FMCG companies, and across the board we're going to find it very difficult to be able to delineate between these organizations or sectors. And that's what's causing a massive challenge for organizations. How do we unpack this? How do we appreciate it? How do we respond to it? And the last two are very much around this interplay between strategy and innovation. And innovation is often a misplaced term. We often hear about innovation, but never really get to appreciate what are the nuances of innovation. Yes, technology might be an element of it, but it's one element of a multitude of elements within this innovation landscape. And Koos Bekker, the founder of Naspers, had a very interesting observation at the World Economic Forum at Davos this year. He said two things. It's the first time I've come to Davos where we had 27-year-olds sitting in the front, and Songoba will be happy to hear this, sitting in the front and telling us where the future of the world is going into, the role of demography. And secondly, the World Economic Forum said that innovation for a long period of time was the last credit in the movie that was playing out. It's now the main actor. And so how do we understand the role of that main actor? And the third one is very much around personal leadership. We understand that there's a new movie. We see the complexity of change. What's the role of personal agency? So I'm going to focus today on two things: on the political economy and moving away from the hype and the sensation and the impact on learning. And then I'm going to focus on sector disintermediation, the end of traditional sectors. And I'm going to use a sector that I'm particularly passionate about, the automotive sector, as a case study for our conversations so that we're not all over the place. But I want to start with one of my favorite quotes. It's a quote by John Galbraith, who said that all of the great leaders have had one characteristic in common. It's the willingness to unequivocally confront the major anxiety of their people at their time, and that and not much else is the essence of leadership. In order for us to understand the Uberization of learning, we've got to understand where the changes within these three lenses of competitiveness are operating. What is happening within the personal context? What's happening within the country that we're operating in? And what's happening within the sectors that we're operating in? And what does it mean for the teams and organizations that we are part of? Where's the anxiety points from a country perspective? And for me, what I want to focus on today is around this disintermediation of sectors. The fact that we're starting to see a whole shift in terms of the nature of the firm and how firms are set up. And if that's happening at the rate and the pace that we see, it means that the way we learn within these organizations have to shift. The way we present learning in organizations have to shift. So let's look at some of what's happening. The first is that we find that exponential organizations are taking less and less time to be able to create significant value from a market cap perspective. So Uber, this application company that managed to facilitate movement and transport of people, has managed to create a market cap of over $70 billion in 3.5 years. Take the market capitalization of our top 5 banks in South Africa, bang them together, and do a comparison to Uber. And today, I can get from here up to the northern part of Tshwane without saying a single word. It might be rude, but I can jump into the back of my Uber, who'll be here within a minute, jump into the back, he or she, the driver, will know exactly where I'm going to, get me to the northern part of Roslyn. I'll leave that Uber without being concerned or worried about who has facilitated the transaction on the back end. Which bank, which financial services player, how was it done? It's irrelevant to me. And so we're starting to find that exponential organizations are disintermediating traditional sectors. And I want to use the auto sector. It excites me, it's interesting for me. And for me, the CEO and chairman of General Motors best encapsulated this. Mary Barra said that I believe the auto industry will change more in the next 5 to 10 years than it has changed in the last 50 years. What's happening in the auto sector? Who's heard of Sebastian Thrun? So Sebastian Thrun in 2004 was a Stanford professor. He lost his friend in a motor vehicle accident. And coming out of the death of his friend was quite a bit of introspection and reflection in terms of fatalities on the road and the causality of these fatalities. And after doing a significant amount of homework and studies in many countries, he came out with one hypothesis, that human beings are a big factor in terms of our safety or non-safety of our roads. And then he asked a logical question. Is it possible for us to take out human beings from the car? And at that time, obviously, it was impossible, Marty McFly, 2030 stuff. And he then went to Google, and Google gave him 20% of his time to build what we call self-autonomous technology. Today, we know what self-autonomous technology has done. It's fundamentally changed the entire industry. And what Sebastian Thrun said when he was in South Africa last year resonates with me every day that I wake up. He said, what we learned and what we studied 3 years ago, not 30 years ago, is 90% irrelevant to how we navigate and lead organizations in the next 5 years. And secondly, he said, nobody knows that we tried on 14 occasions to build a self-driving car. We failed 13 times over, and only on the 14th time we got it right. What has Sebastian Thrun done? Well, one, the mayor of New York announced a few months ago that every single yellow cab in New York City will be a self-driving yellow cab in May 2017. That's 9 months from now. If you don't believe me, get onto Google. Secondly, the CEO of BMW announced that we're questioning our very reason for existence. Our task is to preserve our business model so that we don't end up as the Foxconn for a company like Apple. For those of you who've never heard of Foxconn, they manufacture every single Apple product in the world. They employ 1.3 million people, but nobody's heard of Foxconn because the value of a product lies in the brand. And so BMW has said that we can't continue to be this scrap metal dealer, as they called it. We've got to become an R&D and innovation company. We've got to move to a space of proactive adaptation. So think about it. BMW sells sheer driving pleasure. The search engine company has taken away that sheer driving experience. And now they've got to think about what's the future. The second one is around a company called Zipcar. Zipcar is a company that's in the United States, in New York City. For $149 a month, you have access to the Zipcar network, which means if you're on the corner of 53rd and 3rd Avenue and you need a 4x4 to go to the Kruger Park this weekend, you go onto the Zipcar app because you've paid the $149. You input your requirements, a big boot, a 4x4, with 3 baby seats in my instance, a 0-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. The embedded geolocator will lead you to your nearest Zipcar, corner 55th and 7th. You jump into the car, your phone unlocks it, you have a code that gets you to start the car. You use it for 2 days. You come back, and let's say you end up at Friends for a braai in Boksburg. You leave your car in Boksburg, and you carry on with your life. What it does mean is that it's challenging the traditional model of ownership, because I no longer have to worry about owning a motor vehicle. I no longer have to worry about the insurance costs of that motor vehicle. I no longer want to worry about the maintenance of that motor vehicle, because it's illogical that we sit here for the next 2 days and pay for the 100% of the repayment of that motor vehicle. It's logical that we share it because we only use it 8% of the time. What does that mean for insurance companies, for financial services, for people in the maintenance industry? And I'll end on this here. This is my picture that I picked up from BMW. It's the car of the future, because it means that with self-autonomous technology coming through in the next 5 years, our motor vehicles, and by the way, you can see the steering wheel, will be the opportunity for us to get our shopping done on the way in the motor vehicle, an opportunity to check our vitals and our healthcare statistics, an opportunity to do all of our retail operations in the motor vehicle, an opportunity for us to be able to engage with the telcos that we have, and so much more. Which means that automotive companies, in order to remain relevant, have to question their reason for existence. And you see this disintermediation. I've used the auto sector just as a case study. There's so many others. Thank you.